an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 3, The Veiled Throne by Ken Liu, covering chapters 20, 21, and 22. In these chapters, there's so much to talk about here. I am really going to have to be on the ball. But the main thing that is distracting me is, of course, Gia, who's apparently made heroin. I'm not excited at all. I don't like this. Gia, why are you like this? Why is she like this? Why is she like this, though? For real. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Okay, Kyle, I just want to know why you want to put me through this. These books, they whip me all over the place. It's emotional. It's draining. It's so much. It's just, Kyle, I just feel like you kind of want me to suffer. Is that what you want, Kyle? Is that what you're after? Because mission accomplished. And it's wild because, like, nothing, there's no significant death in these chapters. Nothing like that, which you would think would make me, lead me to feeling this way. But it's the implications of what Gia is working on, which we will get to, that I am feeling such dread. I mean, seriously. A dread that I'm like, sometimes Gia has had thoughts and plans that circumstances sort of coalesce and cut off, and her plan never manifests. She's never actually able to follow through. And I'm low-key hoping that's the case here, because I just don't want to watch this part, and I'm really concerned over it. I hate this. So, okay. I gotta back up and start at the beginning. So, chapter 20, Living Bones. This is delightful. This is basically Thera deciding that she's going to, pull back on being a control freak and try and embrace some more of the, if not necessarily traditions of the Agon peoples, she's at least giving some space for them to infiltrate her traditions. I feel like acting like she's embracing the traditions really is too strong, because that would imply that she's sort of participating in things. And it isn't so much that as she is releasing her stranglehold on the concept of what should be happening and insisting everything sort of revolve around Dara and making everything as close to Dara as possible. And this is the kind of thing that I deeply relate to. As you guys know, I hated what I saw with Thera and her kids because I understood where she was coming from very deeply. And I don't have children. I don't have a sense of wanting to hand things down. But I do really care about sharing things that are important to me, because it is not something that I do often. I am not and I mean that on a personal level. Obviously with the show, I do that nonstop, and it's my entire job. But on a personal level, it is it's a moment of real vulnerability for me to do it. And if I don't get a good response, it's very crushing. And I am not really in a foreign land far from home, in as much as Texas can feel that way to me, a Connecticut girl sometimes. And like I said, I don't have children that I'm worrying aren't ever going to understand anything about where I come from. Also, I am somebody who is heading her own business and handling everything herself and tends to like very, very often feel dissatisfied with the competence of people around me. And those just aspects of her personality and feelings of my way is the right way, despite those feelings being embedded because of culture and not necessarily only because of having a controlling personality, which is what it is with me, I still really understand how hard it is to let go and allow other people to handle aspects of something that is really important to you. And like, when I talk about things that are important to me, I'm talking about it in a business sense. This is like literally life and death with Thera. So her allowing other people to be in control of the training of troops and the creating of recipes and the education of the children, all of this stuff, it's a big deal. And I'm sure that there are people out there who don't have this kind of like need to be in charge of everything, who are like, this sounds great, let other people handle stuff, and then you get to just like go hang out with your kids and have a good time. And it's like a bit of a break, you know, you get to like kick back. The thing is, when you're this type, that's not really how it works. You allow other people to step in, and then you like sit there and obsess and worry about what could potentially go wrong. And it's so just hard to get yourself out of that anxiety mindset. So I really respect how hard she is trying to give everyone else the space and not like be around, sort of looking over their shoulder and micromanaging things. She really does go off with her children, attempt to like give things a ton of breathing room. And even at one point when her mother-in-law is sort of like asking how things are going with the training of the troops, she allows herself at one point to say, we still don't have a plan. And that's as close as she gets to like any kind of criticism. Otherwise, she's like, it's going a lot better than it was. I will say that. So I just understand that people who don't have this kind of like compulsion, that's the only way I can put it, to always run shit, it's really difficult to express how anxiety inducing it is to allow other people to be in charge, and how hard it is to accept that even if things don't go the way you wanted them to, that isn't an inherently bad thing. Somebody may not accomplish the goal that you sort of mentally had in mind for whatever task you gave them. And sometimes the goal they do achieve winds up being more valuable or winds up opening the door to something else. And it's just really impossible to see that coming, because the whole point of a person achieving a goal that way is they do a thing you weren't intending. So you have to be open-minded and creative and have like an imagination about things in a way that is the antithesis of being in charge with a plan, you know? Anyway, just wanting to say this because Thera really is trying here, and it has happened quite quickly. And I am impressed with her and appreciate how much she has like taken everything to heart. So she's delegating more work. She is allowing other people who are from the Agon to like collaborate. And when Takval says, let's see, she even skipped out on some of the meetings with Takval and his thanes as they debated potential plans for attacking Pekyu Kuju's Tatan. I thought you always said if you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself, said Takval, at once bemused and amused. When did I suddenly become competent in your eyes? Thera chuckled at the gentle dig. I suspect you're not the only one who resents my style. Resent is probably too strong a word, began Takval. Thera held up a hand to stop him. This is an alliance between two peoples, but I've been acting like I'm the only one with good ideas. I've been neglecting the lessons of my father, to listen to counsel, to let those with talent fly as high as they can. And honestly, the let those with talent fly as high as they can. What I liked about this was that when I thought about the way that Thera was approaching everything, I never felt like that was the issue for her, because the talent was not apparent in a lot of respects. So honestly, I was sort of falling into the same trap she was, where she wanted things done a specific way. And if the people around her didn't display a talent for doing it in the way that she wanted, she did not see them as having talent, period. And wasn't making use of it because there was not value there as far as she was concerned. And I realized, like, as she said it here, oh, right. Because if you're only valuing a particular type of idea, other talent isn't going to be apparent because you are so focused on a very small sort of like set of standards that have a narrow, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just thought it was interesting because, you know, I have talked a lot in previous episodes, especially in the first book when Kuni is like putting people into important positions in his government, how I've admired that he is willing to take the advice of others, that he is willing to allow the expertise of somebody who is disagreeing with him to shine through, because he recognizes that they have done this for, you know, decades, and he has no idea because he has just started to do this recently. And I wasn't applying that to the Agon people at all, because I am also doing what Thera is doing and being like, well, if they're not thinking of things the same way that she is, then what's the point? And right there, man, that's part of the paucity of imagination that can get us in trouble. It really can. So anyway, she has spent some time with her children, and this is just so devastating. Her kids are not excited to spend time with her because they think this is like a trick and they're going to be made to do logograms and lessons. Like, essentially every time that she has ever devoted attention to them one-on-one, it has been to instruct and disapprove and drill things into their head that they are resistant to learning. And I really appreciate that we've only gotten the one scene, like, that we actually get to watch ourselves of her interactions with her sons. But it still got across to us that this is sort of the way it always goes. And her kids just being like, can grandma come? Because they're like, they want a buffer to what they are certain is going to be a sneaky attempt by their mother to like get them to do schoolwork, basically. Ugh, it's rough. I felt really, she understands and she isn't as hurt by it as I expected. But God, I just felt so bad. You know, that is the thing I think that can be the hardest is I don't know how many of you all out there have had this moment, but you can kind of make yourself, what's the word I want to use here? You can form an image of the role you play in someone's life in your head that is much more based around your intentions and what you want to play in their life than it is around the reality of the role you play. And when you see what the expectation is from somebody who is around you a lot and the way they automatically react to something that you are about to say, that's extremely revealing sometimes. And you realize, I thought I served this function and that I was like, you know, somebody who was bringing experience to the table and who was intelligent and helpful. And the way they're responding is the way you respond to somebody who's hypercritical, never happy, and always butting in with advice. And it is a really awful feeling to like step back and see the way they responded to something is telling you about the way you actually are versus what you have been intending the whole time. And I have run into this with Owen more than once and had to like really reevaluate the way that I interact with him sometimes, because I don't intend to be like bossy, domineering advice giver. But there have been times where I start to say something and what I'm about to say is actually like, okay, we can do it that way. I guess that's a pretty good idea. And I'll start to say, okay. And he'll be like, I know you don't like it. And he'll cut me off and just assume I'm about to like criticize what he just said or disagree with him or whatever. And he has been so sure that's how I would react that he's already gearing up to kind of get in an argument with me. And I have to stop and be like, oh, well, that's not coming from nowhere. That's coming from a response to a behavior that I apparently display quite frequently. So that is saying something to me about the way that I am versus how I think I am. And it's a really like shocking thing sometimes. Not always. Sometimes you're delighted and realize you play the exact role you're hoping. But the closer people are to you, the less that tends to be true, I find. Because you are more yourself a lot of times and are less careful with your words and attitudes the closer you are to somebody. And they see what's really there more clearly. Anyway, all that to say, this was so heartbreaking, and I was really glad that it goes well, even though Thera kind of puts her foot in it at one point. But long story short, she has a chat with her mother-in-law while her boys work on something. And what we find out is that the strategy that the Thera versus the Agon had been trying to implement with the attack, they were both sort of at odds with each other. And eventually they realized that the Thera strategy was heavily dependent on making metal weapons and teaching Agon people how to use those weapons and fight in the Thera style. But they just do not have the resources to make enough metal weapons for everybody. They don't have the skilled smiths that they would need. Like, everything about the way that the Thera people would approach this for their current circumstances is not practical. So they have to bow to the Thera or the Agon, like their theories behind the actual attacks themselves, and also the practical aspects of the kinds of weapons that they're going to use and the way that they're going to institute their attacks in sort of segments rather than a one large attack. They want to do multiple attacks. And the thing that so it says the Agon believed that Admiral Mitsuroso's plan would leave them open to reprisals by Kuju and the Liuku war thanes, while the Thera believed that Thane Vara Ronalek's plan would take too long and risk giving Kuju another chance to invade Thera. And eventually, they just have to give up the Thera technique, and they go with the Agon technique. Thera fretted over this decision. Takval, Vara, Nemshi, and Tipo couldn't agree on the best way to strike at multiple Liuku sites, since they had only a limited number of Gerinifans. Breeding Gerinifans and training skilled crews took time. Even as the settlement grew stronger year after year, the date of the anticipated showdown with the Liuku kept on being pushed back. Other than Takval, nobody knew of the countdown that was ever present in Thera's head. So this, basically, it's like, yeah, it's almost 3 years away, but it's over a year to sail from Ukigonde to Thera. And I didn't even realize that it was quite that long, but damn. I feel like it's been mentioned before, and I just forget because it's too long. I can't handle it. And she can't tell whether the Liuku are aware that there's going to be an opening in the Wall of Storms. It's like unclear, but the more they have to wait to act, the more she begins to get anxious that they do know about it and they're going to do something. And they have to get a hold of the city ships and make their move. It's imperative. And they wind up getting kind of presented with an opportunity later, but I'll get to that in a second. The first thing we get here, forgive me, I'm going to adjust my seat here. So the boys have created this wild creature out of bone and, quote, sinew. The sinew is like, some of it is actual sinew that they keep oiled so that it's still flexible. Some of it is wool that they have spun. I'm not going to get into the whole description of this, but it is extremely intricate, and it depends on using the wind to begin the movement of certain sections, and the bones will act as like gears inside and move it so that it can walk. And this sounds so damn cool. And Thera did not know that they could make this shit because she hasn't been paying attention to that, because she's been trying to get her kids to learn and do other stuff. She's been laying a ton of value and attention on the reading and writing skills that will eventually probably benefit them. But in the immediate future, this is probably going to be a lot more valuable. And she is so impressed with this and just can't believe. At first, she only is looking at it as a static kind of sculpture, and she's already impressed. And then when she sees it walking, she's like, what the fuck? And eventually she's like, did you guys come up with this? And the two of them are like, no, all of these kids make these things, and their shit's way more intricate than ours. They can make stuff that can swim. He says, Nalu's Arukuro Tukoa can tumble and do flips. Thera was speaking in Dara, while Tonto and Rokiri answered in Agon. For the time being, she didn't insist that they speak only Dara to her. It felt natural. Big steps. And eventually, she asks about certain bones. And Tonto says these are the finger and toe bones of dead warriors. And when they say this, she says, you disturbed the rest of the dead? You desecrated it? She stopped herself as she saw the hurt and fright in the eyes of her sons. So this is something that's like a pretty big deal in terms of the differences between a lot of cultures, is the handling of the dead. And for the Dara people, you bury them. You leave them to rest. It's really disrespectful to grave rob or do anything, but as we do hear later, not to everybody. And it's something that she understands the Agon don't feel. For them, burying the dead is kind of fucked up, like you're trapping them. You're supposed to leave them open so that their soul can fly up and the eye of their god can be on them. And her mother-in-law says that the bones are given to kids to play with in the hopes that the spirit of the warrior can be carried on and inhabit the kids a little bit. Not in a possession way, but their fighting spirit. And she has to really bite her tongue and be like, okay, yeah, and accept this. And at one point she notices that they have logogram pieces that they've worked into these little toys. Nalu made fun of us for using the logogram pieces, but Kunulotika said the logograms made our beasts special, said Rokiri. They made them ours. Oh, my baby, said Thera. Tonto turned his head away so that she would not see the tears spilling from his eyes. Thera pulled Tonto into a fierce hug. The boy stiffened. After a few moments, Tonto relaxed and hugged her back. I love this so much. I hate it. that he is like so stiff when she embraces him. But I love that eventually he chills, and there's just clearly a wall between them that she's really working on breaking down. So Volyu comes to visit. And long story short, because I have to make time for the other 2 chapters, Volyu is here, and he tries to say initially that I am super impressed with how far you have come with training your men and your fighters. I shouldn't say men because that's only Dara. But your weapons and everything, like, you've really come a long way. If you'll give me half of your warriors, I will help you get to the point where we can have an imminent attack. You are clearly very, very much on the precipice of being ready to get this started. And I was so relieved because, like, the first thing that I thought is, we know this guy ain't shit. And they give him half their warriors. It's a 50-50 chance that he's going to come back and make war on them with their own people. The man is just not to be fucking trusted. And thankfully, everybody is aware of this. And they have to sort of be like, dude, no. First of all, we're giving you our warriors because the plan that we're going with requires the people who represent different groups to be present. And if you're not there, it's going to be suspicious. But also, you know that you have been a slimy bastard. You are fully aware. If you want us to trust you, you have to put yourself in a perilous position and take some risk. You can't just expect to share in whatever power and spoils we wind up with because you happen to be like on the team, but you didn't do anything. You've got to earn that shit. And acting like you're just entitled to be part of this because of who you are is you trying to low-key ignore the shit you've pulled in the past. And eventually, he cops to that. He doesn't like it. The title that they plan to give him to sort of like mitigate his irritation is largely a ceremonial position. It's like he would be respected, but he wouldn't have actual power to make big calls within the tribe. And he knows that. But I was just really grateful that that Takval and Thera sort of look at each other and are like, yeah, we're not giving him our warriors. In the midst of this all too, I'm just going to mention this. Volyu tries a moonbread biscuit, and it's a different type of recipe that he has, like, it's part of the attempt to join their cultures together using more of the Agon ingredients. And Tipo Tho, who is the one who's doing a lot of the cooking, resisted using a lot of different ingredients because she is somebody who is like me, has a lot of homesickness and nostalgia tied into her food and is trying to recreate things because she misses them. And finally, at one point, when she is, I think she's talking to Torio? Is that Dorio? That's how you say it. Dorio is saying, like, why don't you want to try some other ingredients? Like, can't you imagine the cool new things that you could make? This is such an interesting world, and there are some flavors from this land that are gorgeous, and if you put them with your gorgeous flavors, like, something amazing and new will be born. And Tipo kind of is like, not for nothing, but even the stuff that I'm trying to make as close to the Dara recipe as possible, I can't because I don't have those ingredients. So I've already been substituting so much. I guess I may as well just really go for it. And this is, the birth of all kinds of different cuisines came about this way. The combination of the cooking of the native peoples and then the people who come. And it's fascinating to me, like the way that gastronomical history works, especially the consideration of foods that aren't native to the land then being brought over, you know, I just find that to be very compelling. So he's eating that and just like, this is super good. What is in this? He also gets a little too drunk and he like says something about how, can you imagine I almost got to fuck this bitch? And he's like borderline gross about it. And they have to be like, hey, how about you cut it on that booze for a second, sir, because you're being lecherous and nobody likes it and it's really uncomfortable. You're old. Stop. So this is when they start talking about the opportunity that he has brought to them, which is basically there is going to be a massive gathering of all of these things at the Aluro Basin to celebrate Cujo's. It's allegedly to like celebrate a holiday for them, but Cujo is the son of Pecutenrio and brother to Tanvanaki. And he has been sort of waiting to see if they're going to come back and has finally just accepted they probably won't be back. So he is the one in charge now. So it's kind of meant for them to like come and pledge loyalty or at least respect and bring gifts and whatever. And since they're going to be there all together, the opportunity to take everybody down is kind of irresistible. And it's so irresistible that part of me is wondering if this is like really a real thing or if they have been found out and are being set up. I'm just so constantly suspicious of Volyu that I couldn't even bring myself to trust what he was saying about this event by itself. You know, I don't know. I don't know. And Thera says we should target Totten instead. And it says Volyu looked at her oddly. And I'm like, did he now? Because like maybe Volyu is responding to the fact that he's supposed to get her to do a certain thing and she's not inclined to do it the way that he has been promising he would get her to do it. I just don't like him. I just don't trust it. There is something about the way he's leering at her that makes me think he feels like she's still a possibility for him. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't trust it. So anyway, Volyu tries to make an argument for why the original plan is better. And Thera says, okay, but the thing is that if we go to Totten instead, the Thanes intent on impressing Cujo will be alert and on guard when they first arrive at Aluro's Basin. By the time they get back to Totten, however, they will be relaxed from the earlier celebration. They'll be competing in Totten to see whose gifts and tribute are the most lavish, and they will have let their guard down, basically. And eventually he accepts what she says. And I'm like, does he accept it because he knows pushing back is going to be suspicious, or does he really not have anything else up his sleeve? I don't know what to think. And it takes a little bit more convincing for her to get Solian on her side, because Solian just straight up doesn't want to battle. She's like still holding on to this concept that maybe they'll be able to do this without bloodshed. Like low-key wants to just keep hiding here in this valley that they've taken up residence in. And Thera has to be like, you knew that this was going to have to come to an end at some point. So anyway, like I said, they come to this agreement with him based on the fact that he has been treacherous in the past. And he eventually agrees. And he even says, there always comes a time for the old to yield to the young. And he like drinks his Kyofir and agrees. So we go to chapter 21, and Tanvanaki is speaking to a very cowed academic here who has been looking through the calculations left behind about the Wall of Storms by Luenzia and has found a code in it. And this poor guy has been so tormented by her that he can't even like look at her, and he pisses himself when she sort of presses why he didn't figure this out sooner. And she has such contempt for him, even though she's the one who did this to him. And I hate that so much. There's like, it's not said. And it's hard sometimes for me to know whether it's not said because she isn't feeling this, or if it's not said because the way that the author is choosing to write her POV is only engaging with her conscious thoughts, and any sort of subconscious is completely left out. But there's a part of me that wonders if the contempt she feels for him is mixed with a bit of guilt at knowing she's the one who made him like this. I don't know, but that can be a thing that happens. You mistreat someone and you did, and your feelings of discomfort and guilt surrounding that evolve into you disliking the person that you wronged. And it's a weird thing, but it's 100% like real. I just can't sense if that's playing any role with her, because Tamanaki is not she's not somebody who tends to seem to have remorse. It's sometimes there's a tiny hint of it. Like when she's talking to Timu and he says something about the children of rape, she has a response that feels like shame. Like this is she does have some remorse. So it's just hard for me to tell. Is the feeling of remorse being just left out because she doesn't allow herself to even think about that? Or is it being left out because she really doesn't feel that at all? Anyway, it says, for years, Luanzia's old calculations had simply been assumed to be a deception. No one thought to try to approach them as a coded message. And this was interesting because basically she's getting this from what her nameless spy, as she keeps calling him, what he told her he overheard, which we know is planted. And it seems like the info that has been planted is correct information. But the code, I don't remember whether that is a real thing that Luanzia intended or not. She is sort of taking it as the two turtles that turned up with the message inscribed in their shell. She is taking those turtles, which were actually intended for the Dara rulers, as like hey, we're coming, don't worry about us. She's taking that to be a message from her own people, who are saying that they are bringing an additional fleet with them. So I am assuming that is the intention, that Gia is trying to get them to think they just have to bide their time, and then they'll have such support that they can overpower the Dara people, and therefore they will not be preparing for a prolonged coexistence. But I'm not quite seeing all the puzzle pieces here. And the whole thing with this code, I thought that the Liuku who were already here definitely knew what the openings for the Wall of Storms was going to look like. So the idea that they just cracked the code and have found out that it's going to be opening surprises me, because they got here. So I had assumed they were operating with that information to begin with. And I'm sure it's been explicitly explained in the previous book, but I don't recall how that worked. So anyway, she is thinking to herself about how behind they are in terms of engineering and whatnot in comparison to Dara. Essentially, as Gia says later, they are going to attempt to catch up to the Dara people the way that the Dara are trying to train and learn to use Garinafin. They're each attempting to learn about the specific advantage the opposing side had in play when they were actively at war. And they're using this peacetime to improve in those respects, even though they are allegedly meant to be at peace, they're still both acting like they are at war. And that makes sense. So what she wants to do is to collect as many intelligent minds who have the aptitude for engineering and whatnot as she can. And she's doing this by using pirates as a proxy. And that way she can have like plausible deniability that she's still engaging in a sort of warfare tactic. And eventually, later on, when Gia and Zomi are talking, it becomes very clear like Gia is aware that's what's going on. So, yeah, she says, contact the pirates, inform them I want them to focus on the area around Ginpen. They need to get me useful people, engineers, mechanics, smiths, artisans who know how to invent machines. And then we go into the inner council chamber with Zomi and Gia. And it's really fascinating because Zomi is so intelligent, but she does not think the way that Gia does. And Gia has to walk this line with Zomi where she educates her on how to think this way, but also not too much, or Zomi will be able to see what Gia is doing and planning. And Gia can't have that. So she has to really kind of like be careful about how well she trains Zomi. And that is fascinating because like Zomi is just, she is so intelligent about so many things, but she has been made Farsight secretary. And part of me is like, she isn't really super well suited to this particular job. And is that why she's in this place? But purposely because she wouldn't be great at it? Or is it because there's a potential there that could be exploited? You know, I don't know. But anyway, they talk about the overall, like, the way that the Ryuku have managed to weaponize the elites of the Dara people against the poor of the Dara people. And especially, essentially what has been done, and this is just a fucking tale as old as time, isn't it? If we, the enemy, grant certain privileges and status to people of rank, they will help us oppress the smaller people who will take the brunt of whatever violence is going to happen with this, like, occupation. And the position that puts the elites in is one of, well, now I have to root for the enemy, because if my people win, I am definitely going to be killed for being a traitor, essentially. So they have managed to make allies out of native peoples, and it's just extremely effective, even though it's such a basic thing. And then they start talking about the kidnapped passengers who have certain skills and whatnot. And they start thinking about the information that they got from Noda. It's Noda? Noda me. And while Zomi is like ready to sort of throw out whatever it is that he said, because she thinks like, this guy is just so treacherous, you can't trust anything he says, Gia is like, no, you know his personality. This man is nothing if not constantly aware of what is good for him. So operating on that, if he told us something, it's going to be true in some way, because he is intending to get us to do something that will benefit him. And they figure out that he is worried about the way Tanvanaki is taking on people who are skilled at a bunch of different types of work, because he is in a position of privilege right now with her. And there is every potential that those people could knock him out of his spot. And he doesn't seem to know how aware Tanvanaki is that he is full of shit. But he really seems to think that it's like other Dara people that are his enemy here. So he is hoping that by drawing attention to the fact that she's going after this type, he'll be able to stop her from doing it through Gia and Zomi. So anyway, they talk about this, and Zomi says, well, if we disrupt her, and she's thinking about there's an unspoken thing between the two of them over how probably the privileges that are being granted to the elites, actually all of that is likely Timu's idea. And there is a moment here where she's wondering how we can possibly, like, how we can do anything to cause destabilization there. And Gia's face is described as being impassive. And as soon as it was described as impassive, I was like, yeah, she's going to kill him. She hates this, but she's gonna. So then we go to this awful scene with Gia. She is making a drug and is experimenting on a rabbit. And as we find out, not just rabbits. She's also experimenting on prisoners. Another tale as old as time. And has been doing this thing where she is breeding a plant to be more and more potent, and then doing some kinds of like chemical treatment to it in order to make it less and less detectable. And this rabbit that has clearly been given dosages of this and has been kept from having any more, she is taking notes on the reaction it is having to the fumes that are coming up from the cooking of this chemical, this drug. And the rabbit breaks its own jaw and bites off its own legs out of this crazed desperation to get out of the cage and get near this drug. And it's hideous. It's truly hideous. It's so hard to read. And like, to her credit, and I say this with many asterisks, Gia is having a really hard time with it. She is doing the experiment and trying to be dispassionate, but it isn't possible for her to like overlook the effects that this is having and imagine what this is going to do. And it is, at one point she has to like put something between her teeth and bite down so that she doesn't scream, because somebody's going to notice and come in and be able to tell some of what she's probably working on. And she has to clean everything up totally so that there's no evidence, and has tears streaming down her face as she's like continuing to work, because this is just something that she hates having to do, but believes is necessary to do. Now, the way that this is thought about in her head, let's see. She must never mention what critical bit of information she had instructed Lady Ragi to leak in Rui, and what message she had asked Lady Ragi to take to Timu. And she thinks, oh, Tototika, I'm so sorry. If only there were another way. I can't allow myself the luxury of regret. Teeth on the board. I hold the seal of Dara, and this is my burden. So whatever she's doing with this drug is going to involve Timu somehow, but I cannot figure out if she's planning to make him an addict, if she is planning to make him the means by which she gets the drug into the hands of Liuku, or the Dara, elites, or the people lowest on the totem pole in Dara. I can't figure out what exactly it is she's trying to do. But God knows drugs are a very reliable way to destabilize places and people. That's just a fucking tried and true method. And the way that she has figured out how to make this so appealing initially, and then the lack of it drive people mad the way it seems like she has, this is terrifying to me. So this whole experiment with the rabbit is already terrible, but then she goes to the prison. She's letting the guards think that the whole thing is that she's sleeping with these prisoners, when really she is giving them this drug. And it has evolved. So previously it had been forcibly injected or shoved down their throats, or they had been forced to inhale things. Now she has managed to distill it to the point that it is indetectable in the food. And this guy is eating and having a great time. And he gets super high on this stuff. Her and her guards leave. And the prison guard sees the guy and thinks it always starts like this. So this man has seen others go downhill. And I don't know if we have seen deaths. He doesn't really get specific in his thoughts about what he expects this to happen to this man. But obviously the honeymoon only lasts so long. And I don't know. I feel like a rabbit really should be sufficient, Gia. Do you have to do this to people? Ken Leo goes to pains to explain to us how bad a person the guy she's experimenting on is, literally a torturer who trafficked in children. So obviously Gia is trying to only subject some of the worst possible human beings to this, but that isn't who she's going to be limiting it to in practice once it's out of her hands. So whatever, so it's just, I am so nervous about this. The effect of drugs and the way that they can just completely subvert people's free will never fail to terrify me. I grew up around parents who used drugs, one who was an outright addict and managed to get out of it, but it's left marks, and I saw the effect of it on their friends and people around them. I am hyper aware of what they can do, and the idea of using them with intent in this way sickens me in a way that I just can't express. It's so despicable. And Gia keeps trying to convince herself that her own revulsion at what she's doing is somehow her sacrificing on behalf of Dara. And I just don't buy it, girl. I just don't. We'll see. We'll see. So, last chapter. I only have a little bit of time left. I'm going to read this opening because it was a little bit hard for me to grasp who we were with here. Gentle waves lapped the empty beach by the village of Kigoyezu on this warm early autumn afternoon. And in the lee of one of the dunes stood a hut, little more than 4 bamboo poles holding up a roof of woven palm leaves. In its shade, an old woman and a young man, both dressed in the robes of Dara scholars, knelt across from each other in formal mipa rari on pig's bristle grass sitting mats. And this boy is Ryuku. And he is getting trained by somebody who is Dara, Nazute. We haven't met Nazute before. Correct me if I'm wrong. I really paid sharp attention because I was wondering if it was going to be revealed that this was somebody we should know. I don't think so, but there are so many characters in these stories. I could be wrong about this. And the whole thing here is, it turns out that Kinri is the child of, oh my God, the names, guys, I'm so sorry. We get there eventually. But he has been allowed to learn from this Dara woman who is a scholar in a way that is kind of considered treasonous. But this is his mother thinking that all of this is going to wind up being in his favor eventually, that this stuff is important for him to know. So the advantage that she's trying to give her kid, while very intelligent, is also a tacit admission that the Thera people are going to remain in some power and won't ever really go away. And that indulging in some of their history and their knowledge is ultimately going to be to the benefit of anyone in power. And the whole scene here with him and Nazu, he is saying things that he has learned from official histories. And she is responding with a really weird sort of ambivalence a lot of the time, because she knows that nothing is as simple as it is written down in these histories. And it's just really, it's reminding me of like a parent sitting with someone else's child and that child reciting to them what they learned in history class today. And like, you aren't really in a position where you're supposed to be like, that's actually not true. We wrote it in the history book that way because it makes us look good, but low key, that's like not it. But it's like on the tip of your tongue. And every time that they say something that's inaccurate, it just makes you twitch a little bit, you know? So this whole thing is riddled with like moments for her, especially when he's talking shit about Kuni. She's clearly a Kuni fan. And he doesn't get it and is talking about him like he is just a faithless, you know, like just all of the shit that Matazindu's people thought of Kuni. That is what he has been taught. And at one point, as he's learning from her, he uses like the slur against the Thera people in front of her. And he like apologizes and seems genuinely ashamed of himself. Like that, it doesn't feel like he's just like, oh, I offended you. He has a moment of like, I can't believe I fucking said that. I am so sorry. And I really appreciated that, because it, to me, there is a difference between the kind of person who's just like, I know that that made me look bad, and a person who is like, that made me feel bad as well, you know? So yeah, this whole, like, here it is. Goztan Ryoto. That is her name. Fucking Christ. Trusted confidant of Tanbanaki. Her 13-year-old son, Savo Ryoto, were hunting in the hills near Kigo-Yezu. And Goztan Ryoto had taken Oga Kidosu as a lover. I don't think that anything is mentioned here about what happened to Oga Kidosu. And this kid is too old to like be his child. She had other kids, right? So anyway, he gets thrown and he breaks his leg, her kid, while they're like out hunting. And Nazute is passing in the woods and comes across him and helps heal him. And when Goztan finds out that Nazute is like a scholar who's hidden out here, she has a moment of like, huh, interesting, and asks Nazu if she'll take her son as a pupil. And Nazu is like, I really appreciate the honor you're trying to bestow on me, but I am not the one. And Goztan says, no, you got me wrong. I'm not trying to bring you to the court. I want him to learn about Thera from somebody who isn't wrapped up in the bullshit that's official on the records. And when Nazu asks why, she says, Thera is where he will come of age. He must feel at home here, not a perpetual guest. And Nazu is like, oh, a guest? Is that how you see this? And Goztan gets really red and says, I do not agree with what has been done to your people. But without a deeper understanding from both sides, our terrible past will repeat down the generations. And this is really interesting because Goztan's vibe here is distinct from what I have seen. She has always been thoughtful and tried to consider, but this is like a next level thing. And I really want to go back in her POV and see what's going on with her. Long story short, Nazu manages to like impress some of the ideas that have been left out of his education. One of the big ones being the way that women were treated by some of the sages, and that some of the most like accomplished female scholars were written into the history books as men, and that Konfiji was like painted as being against women's education and being involved in warfare, but that isn't actually the stance that he took. And he is like, this kid is, Kinri is really interested in that and fascinated by the idea that like so much of what he's being taught at court might actually be fundamentally flawed or actively a lie. This is the beginnings of critical thinking. And God knows, I wish that we taught this more in school, but so many parents are like afraid of this. So eventually they're in the midst of like talking about this game. And I wish I could do this chapter more justice. I might kind of double back next episode. But he is proving to be very adept at like the kinds of strategic thinking that would be very important to a ruler. And they're having a good time when all of a sudden there is the sound of a Garinafin horn. And they both have a moment of just like, oh my God, what's going on? And Nazu says, did you tell anybody about coming here? And he never did. But he did say to someone that the person said he was bored with all the games the courtiers knew. And I said I would teach him the soldier's game, the one with the little horses and swordsmen and krubins. And she's like, is that what you said? And he's like, I don't remember. And she realizes that he doesn't know the type of game that she's teaching him involves pieces that the game the Liuku play does not contain, because krubins are considered an animal that is like sacred to and an ally of Dara. So people who are rebels, they use like krubins as part of their sigils. And they are struck from this game in official circles. But he is being taught the original, which nobody is really supposed to know about. So that is a clue that this kid has access to information that is not sanctioned. So they are coming for the two of them, possibly just her, but it's unclear. And she basically takes off running, and he runs after her. And that's the end of the chapter. Interesting to add these two characters at this point, because it feels so like late in the story, and we get dropped into this with no explanation of who either of them are until like midway through the chapter. So it was a little bit difficult for me to set aside wondering who the hell they were until we got the full explanation. I found the conversation really fascinating. And like I said, I wish I could do this more justice. I am maintaining, and Kyle, I'm kind of wondering if maybe once the next book comes out, if you're part of commissioning that, I think we may have to drop back the number of pages per episode, because it has become quite clear that 50 pages in these books contains a whole lot more, literally more words than 50 pages in most books. I think it's just printed in a certain way. The chapters that I cover, like 50 pages in other audiobooks, is usually about an hour and 15 minutes. Each of the chapters of these in the audiobook was about 45 minutes long. So this was over 2 hours. And it's just, I think, genuinely too much to cover. The chapters have already been broken down for this book, so I don't want to make it an issue right now. But just for future reference, I have been feeling like I can never quite keep up with this book and fit everything in. And I'm after like really investigating this consistently, I'm like, yeah, that's not just me. These are packed pages. 50 pages of this is not like a regular book. I don't know. So I just wanted to put that out there. And for those listening who are getting frustrated with me, I'm doing my best. But I skip quite a bit of detail in recounting a lot of this that I would otherwise like to talk about. But I just don't have time, And the two of them I found really fascinating. And the idea that Ghostan is like embracing this aspect of his education is fascinating to me. So I wish I could talk about it more, but what can you do? All right, I'm going to wrap up, but thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this. Thank you to Ms. T for coming and hanging out with me. Hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.